It was just another night on the road for me. The kind of endless, monotonous drive where the lines on the highway blur together, and the only thing keeping you awake is the steady hum of the engine. I'd been driving for hours, my eyes heavy and my mind wandering, when I spotted him, a hitchhiker standing by the side of the road, his thumb out and a hopeful look on his face. I usually don't pick up hitchhikers, but something about him caught my attention. I pulled over, the gravel crunching beneath the tires. The guy looked relatively clean and normal, mid-20s, scruffy beard, and a backpack that seemed worn but not tattered. I didn't see any obvious red flags, so I figured, why not? A little company might help keep me alert. "Where you headed?" I asked as he climbed into the cab. "Thanks for picking me up," he said with a grateful smile. "Just need to get to the next town. I'm trying to get back home." "No problem," I replied, adjusting the mirrors and turning back onto the highway. "It's a long stretch until the next rest stop, so we've got some time." He settled into the passenger seat, and we drove in silence for a while. I was trying to stay awake, occasionally glancing over at him. He seemed content, humming along to the radio. After a bit, he turned to me. "Do you ever think about the places you drive through?" he asked, his voice suddenly serious. "All those little towns and stops, what if something's hiding in them?" I shrugged, trying to focus on the road. "I guess I don't think too much about it. Just a job, you know." "Why do you ask?" He chuckled softly, but there was something off about his laugh. "Just a thought. You'd be surprised what people leave behind in those places." The conversation shifted, and we talked about trivial things, sports, weather, the usual road chatter. I tried to ignore the unsettling feeling creeping up my spine. Everything seemed fine until we drove past a sign indicating a small town just a few miles ahead. "Why don't we stop for a bite?" he suggested. "I could use a break, and it's been a while since I had a decent meal." I hesitated. I hadn't planned on stopping, but something about his suggestion made me uneasy. Still, I decided to pull off the highway. We drove into the town, and it seemed quiet and almost abandoned. The streetlights flickered as if struggling to stay lit, casting eerie shadows on the deserted road. "There's a diner up ahead," I said, pointing to a dimly lit building. "We can stop there." As we pulled into the diner's parking lot, I noticed it was practically deserted. The neon sign flickered sporadically, and the windows were grimy. The whole place had an unsettling vibe, but I shrugged it off. Maybe the town was just sleepy. We walked into the diner. It was old and run down, but the smell of coffee and grease was comforting in a way. The few patrons there looked up briefly before returning to their own business. The waitress, an elderly woman with tired eyes, gave us a nod. "Sit anywhere," she said, her voice flat and weary. We took a booth in the back. I noticed the hitchhiker was unusually quiet, his gaze fixed on the wall. After a few moments, he turned to me with a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. "You know," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "places like this hold more than just people. They carry memories, dark, twisted ones." I frowned. "What are you talking about?" "Sometimes," he continued, ignoring my question, "people who are lost don't really leave. They just stay behind, haunting the places they once knew." I was beginning to feel uncomfortable. "You sound like you're into ghost stories or something." "I'm not really into that stuff." He laughed again, but this time it was colder, more unsettling. "Oh, it's not just stories. It's real. And it's right here, in this diner." Before I could respond, the waitress brought our food, a plate of greasy fries and a burger. The hitchhiker dug into his meal with a fervor that seemed almost maniacal. I picked at my food, my appetite gone. Then I saw it, a flash of movement outside the window. I looked up to see a figure standing in the shadows, watching us intently. I blinked, and it was gone. I rubbed my eyes, trying to shake the feeling of dread. "Do you see that?" I asked the hitchhiker, pointing to the window. He followed my gaze, his expression unreadable. "No. But it's not unusual for places like this. They attract things." I felt a chill run down my spine. "What do you mean by things?" The hitchhiker leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Sometimes people who are lost don't want to be found. They stay here, and they don't let others leave." I was about to ask him what he meant when the lights in the diner flickered violently. The other patrons looked up, their faces pale and frightened. The waitress's tired eyes widened in terror as she glanced toward the kitchen. Then, the power went out completely. The diner was plunged into darkness, the only sound the low murmur of confusion from the few people present. I fumbled for my phone, using its light to scan the room. The hitchhiker's face was illuminated by the dim glow of my phone, and I saw a glint of something in his eyes, a cold, calculating glint. "Looks like we're not alone," he said softly. Panic surged through me. "What are you talking about? What's going on?" Before he could respond, the door to the diner slammed shut with a deafening bang. The patrons let out cries of alarm, and I heard the scuffling of footsteps outside. I tried the door, but it was locked tight. I turned back to the hitchhiker, who was now standing, his demeanor calm and almost expectant. "What did you do?" I demanded. He smiled, a chilling smile. "I didn't do anything. But this place, this diner, it has a way of keeping people." I looked around, realizing that the other patrons were not moving. They were sitting in their booths, their eyes fixed on the door, expressions blank. The air grew colder, and I could see my breath in the dim light of my phone. "What's happening?" I asked, fear creeping into my voice. "They're coming," the hitchhiker said, his voice low and eerie. "The lost souls. They want to keep you here with them." I felt a cold sweat break out as I heard the scratching sound coming from the walls. The air grew heavier, filled with an oppressive weight that made it hard to breathe. The lights flickered again, casting eerie shadows that danced along the walls. I saw shapes moving in the darkness, ghostly figures emerging from the corners of the diner. Their eyes were hollow, their expressions twisted in pain and confusion. They floated silently, reaching out with spectral hands. Desperation took hold. I grabbed the hitchhiker by the arm, trying to drag him toward the door. "We need to get out of here. Now." He didn't resist. Instead, he followed me, but his face held a grim satisfaction. "It's too late for that," he said calmly. "Once you're here, you're part of it. You belong to this place now." I pounded on the door, shouting for help. The ghostly figures were closing in, their cold presence chilling me to the bone. I felt a spectral hand brush against my arm, sending a jolt of fear through me. Suddenly, the diner's power came back on. The lights blazed, and the figures vanished. The patrons blinked, as if waking from a trance, and the door unlocked with a click. I didn't wait. I bolted out of the diner, my heart racing. I could hear the hitchhiker's laughter behind me, a chilling, echoing sound. I jumped into my truck, started the engine, and sped away from that nightmare. As I drove back onto the highway, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The diner was a fading light in the distance, but the image of that place and the hitchhiker's sinister smile stayed with me. I don't know if I'll ever fully understand what happened that night, but I know one thing for sure: I'll never pick up another hitchhiker again. And as I drive on, I can't shake the feeling that something, or someone, is still watching me from the shadows of the road. I'd been driving trucks for over a decade, and after all those miles, I thought I'd seen it all. But nothing could have prepared me for that night. It started out like any other shift. I was hauling a load across the Midwest, just me, the road, and my trusty CB radio to keep me company. The hum of the engine and the rhythmic thrum of the tires on the asphalt were like a second heartbeat. Around midnight, when the sky was a blanket of stars and the road was as empty as a ghost town, I noticed a strange noise coming through the radio. It started as a faint crackling, which I barely paid any mind. After a while, it became a steady, static-filled hum. I adjusted the dial, trying to tune it out, but it persisted. Then, a voice came through, sharp and clear but distorted, like it was coming from somewhere far away. "Breaker 1 to 9, you out there?" I grabbed the mic, puzzled. "Yeah, I'm here." "Who's this?" There was a brief pause before the voice replied. "I've been waiting for you. They're coming." I laughed nervously, thinking it was just some prankster on the other end. "Very funny. What's your handle?" There was no response, just more static. I tried to shake off the uneasy feeling that was creeping up my spine. The voice had been unsettling, but it was probably just some kid messing around. A few miles later, the static returned, this time more insistent. "Driver, you need to listen. They're closer than you think." I felt a chill run down my back. "Who's they?" "I don't understand what you're talking about." The static crackled again, and the voice came through, lower and more urgent. "They're on the road. They're coming for you. Don't stop." My heart raced. I could feel my pulse pounding in my ears. I glanced around, but all I saw was the endless stretch of highway stretching out into the darkness. The road was empty. I tried to contact other drivers, but my calls went unanswered. It was like I was alone on the road. I pushed on, my nerves on edge. The voice continued to come through, each time more frantic. "Keep going. Don't stop. They'll get you if you stop." By this point, I was sweating despite the cool night air. I tried to stay focused on the road, but the unease was becoming unbearable. The voice was right. Every time I looked in the rearview mirror, I half expected to see something following me, though nothing ever did. Then, around 3 in the morning, I noticed headlights in the distance. I breathed a sigh of relief, thinking maybe it was another trucker or a patrol car. But as the lights drew closer, I realized they weren't just headlights, they were multiple sets, moving erratically, as if in pursuit. My heart pounded as I glanced at the radio. "What the hell is going on?" I said, hoping for some guidance. The voice came through again, now almost hysterical. "They're here. They've found you. You have to get off the road. They can't follow you if you're off the highway." I saw an exit up ahead and decided to take it, hoping that if I could get off the main road, I might lose whatever was following me. I veered off onto a dark, winding country road, the headlights still trailing me, growing closer with every turn. The road twisted and turned, surrounded by dense forest. It was the kind of place that felt forgotten by time, and I was growing increasingly anxious. The headlights seemed to have vanished, but the eerie feeling of being watched never left me. Suddenly, the CB crackled again, but this time the voice was different, more mechanical, distorted. "End of the line. This is where it all ends." I slammed on the brakes, skidding to a halt. The headlights had reappeared behind me, but this time, they weren't just following, they were surrounding me. I looked out of the truck's windows, but all I could see was the darkness of the forest and the blinding lights. The radio hissed and then went dead. I tried to reach out on the radio, but the static was all I got. The headlights started moving in a pattern, circling my truck like a pack of predators. I was trapped in the middle, feeling a sense of growing dread. I grabbed the flashlight and stepped out of the truck, my hands shaking. The light stopped moving and focused on me. The forest was silent, as if holding its breath. I could see shadowy figures moving in the periphery, just beyond the reach of the headlights. Their forms were indistinct, shifting with an unnatural fluidity. A figure stepped out from the shadows, a tall man with a face obscured by a dark hood. His eyes glowed faintly, and he spoke in a low, menacing voice. "You shouldn't have come here. I backed away, my heart racing. What do you want from me? Why are you doing this? The figure didn't answer directly. Instead, he motioned, and the other figures emerged from the shadows, their forms becoming clearer. They looked like people, but their faces were twisted into grotesque, expressionless masks. I turned and ran back to my truck, desperate to escape. I fumbled with the keys, my hands trembling. The figures closed in, their footsteps barely making a sound. Just as I managed to start the engine, the lights and figures vanished, leaving me alone in the darkness. I sped back onto the highway, not daring to look back. The headlights were gone, the forest receding into the distance. My heart was pounding, my breaths coming in ragged gasps. I kept driving, not stopping until the first light of dawn began to creep over the horizon. I made it to a truck stop, exhausted and shaken. I contacted the authorities and told them everything that had happened, but they found nothing, no sign of the figures, no evidence of any disturbance. They thought it might have been a hallucination brought on by fatigue or stress. I don't know what I saw that night, but I do know one thing: I'll never trust the CB radio again. It's been years since that night, but the voice still echoes in my mind, a reminder of the shadows that lurk on the road, and the unsettling truth that some things are better left unexplained. I've been driving trucks for years, but I'll never forget that night. I was on one of those endless stretches of highway where the road seems to go on forever. The kind of road where you can't even see a single light in the distance, and it's just you and the black expanse of nothingness. I'd been on the road for hours, and the weariness was starting to set in. My GPS had lost signal ages ago, and my only company was the hum of the engine and the occasional static crackle from the CB radio. I was desperate for a break, so when I saw the flickering sign for a rest stop, I felt a wave of relief. The sign was old and barely legible, but it still advertised a restaurant and a gas station. I took the exit, hoping for a quick break. What I didn't expect was to drive into what felt like a ghost town. The road leading to the rest stop was overgrown, and the parking lot was littered with old tires and debris. I pulled into the lot and noticed how quiet it was. Too quiet. The diner's neon lights were dim and flickering, giving off an eerie, almost hostile vibe. I parked the truck and got out, stretching my legs. The cold air hit me, making me shiver. As I walked up to the diner, I noticed how the place seemed frozen in time. It was like stepping into a scene from an old horror movie. The front door creaked loudly as I pushed it open, and the musty smell hit me immediately. "Hello?" I called out, my voice echoing in the empty space. "Is anyone here?" There was no response. The place felt oppressive, like the air itself was thick with something unspoken. I sat down at the counter, hoping maybe someone would come out. The fluorescent light above buzzed intermittently, casting flickering shadows on the walls. A few minutes passed, and then I heard something, a soft, scuffling noise coming from the back room. My gut told me something wasn't right, but curiosity got the better of me. I stood up and walked toward the noise. The back room turned out to be the kitchen. It was covered in dust and cobwebs, with old appliances that looked like they hadn't been used in decades. And then I saw her. An elderly woman, her clothes tattered and stained, stepped out from the shadows. Her eyes were hollow, and her expression was unsettlingly calm. "Can I help you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. The woman just stared at me with those empty eyes. "You shouldn't be here," she said in a voice that was raspy and distant. "This place is not for you." I frowned. "What do you mean?" "I just needed a break." The woman's lips twisted into a grim smile. "No one leaves the rest stop," she said softly. "Not once they've come this far." Before I could react, I heard a loud bang. I turned to see the door I had entered from slam shut with a force that rattled the walls. My heart raced, and I ran to the door, but it was locked. I tried the windows too, but they were boarded up tightly. I turned back to the woman, but she had vanished into the darkness of the kitchen. Panic set in as I frantically searched for another way out. The markings on the walls caught my eye, symbols I didn't recognize, etched into the wooden panels. The whispers began then, faint and almost imperceptible, growing louder as I moved. The lights flickered and went out, plunging the diner into darkness. I could hear the voices now, a cacophony of disjointed murmurs. I felt a cold sweat break out on my back. Figures began to materialize from the shadows, ghostly forms with hollow eyes, drifting aimlessly through the diner. They looked as lost as I felt. "Hello? Is anyone here?" I shouted, but my voice was swallowed by the darkness. One of the ghostly figures, a man with a mournful expression, drifted closer. "You shouldn't have come," he said. "You'll be one of us now." I stumbled backward as the figures closed in. Their cold, spectral hands reached out to me, passing through my body and sending chills down my spine. I swung at them wildly, but they were untouchable, mere apparitions. Desperation drove me to the kitchen again, where I grabbed a rusty pipe from a cluttered shelf and battered the back door. It cracked but didn't break. The whispers grew deafening, and the figures crowded around me, their cold presence pressing down on me. I ran back to the main area of the diner, pounding on the front door. The door rattled but stayed shut. The lights flickered one last time before going out completely, leaving me in pitch darkness. The last thing I heard was a haunting lullaby from an old jukebox, its melody chilling and sorrowful. As I slumped to the floor, feeling my strength fade, I saw the elderly woman's face one more time, her expression filled with sad resignation. The last thing I remember was the flickering sign outside, now just a dim memory. When morning came, a passing motorist found the rest stop. They saw the same old, abandoned place, with its eerie silence and oppressive atmosphere. Jack Turner, that was me, was never seen again. And that rest stop remains, a forgotten trap for those who wander too close, its secrets forever shrouded in the night.